The axis of disorder. How Russia, Iran, and China want to remake the world. I saw this article, and the thing that jumped out to me, at first I didn't think much of it, but when I looked at it the second time, it startled me what they could mean by disorder. What is it, this access of disorder? I think, are they talking about disruption? And so I wanted to read further because it dawned on me that they were taking a particular point of view that really defied the imagination, that really was living in a limbo. This is what they mean by disorder. And they phrase this concept of disorder in the light of what the West considers to be order. The contemporary, now global Westphalian system has striven to curtail the anarchical nature of the world with an extensive network of international legal and organizational structures designed to foster open trade, really soaring language he's got here, and a stable international financial system, establish accepted principles of resolving international disputes, and set limits on the conduct of wars when they do occur. And when I read into this article and heard this, at first I said, well, it's a lot of prose and poetry to explain what is meant by this rules-based order. The Western-sponsored or the Western-led rules-based order is what they're talking about. This is just a philosophical explanation of it. But in the explanation, I take issue with a couple of points here because it's like they're living in a different world, a different reality. I felt like this was you're in the metaverse or something because what they're talking about is not really what has happened with the Western rules-based order. It has not been stable economics. It has not been peaceful resolutions of power. It has not been a system of equality. It's been a system of inequality, to say the least. And when you really get down into it, this rules-based order really never existed. It was a rules-based system created to ensure the advancement of some and the consistent exploitation and disadvantage of others. I mean, let me give you three reasons how Russia, China, Iran axis threatens NATO and this rules-based order that they're talking about. And I don't know if it's a disorder or is it a reordering. And I think that that's what the fear about from the West and the Western media is not that this is creating anarchy. This is going from a unipolar system where one group imposes rules, regulations in a way that benefits them, calling it rules-based, going from that to a multipolar world where the rules are established and are enforced not just by one but by two polarities, ensuring equity and fairness in the application of those rules. And to me, that's not creating disorder, it's creating order. It may be destructing the current order, but it is a system. You can only have order when there's more than one referee. In a game, you have more than one referee, and that's what creates a system of order where no one person can become a tyrant because you've got multiple individuals. That's why in most of the Western government structures, there's a breakdown between the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. It's to create a system where there are power centers, and these power centers create checks and balances. And so the emergence of a new alliance is not a movement to anarchy and disorder. It is a movement, I would say, towards greater order, equity, and fairness. But before we jump into this, first, let me ask you to like and follow the channel. Give us a like, as well as follow, as well as share the channel so that we can grow the community. Let's talk before we jump into three reasons why this axis will create a new power center in the world. I take issue first with the notion that the Western alliance, that is the basis for NATO, the basis for EU, has created or even attempted to create a peaceful world where there's rules, free flow in the economy, fairness in the economy. I take issue with that because when we look at what NATO has done, when we look at the interventions that the West has taken, the things that they've engaged in, one could hardly live in this fairy tale world that the author is trying to assert that ever existed. Look at all of the NATO interventions: Kuwait, Iraq, Bosnia, Kosovo, Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, and Libya. None of these places were better. None of these places can you not go to now and find a group of people who say, yes, this military intervention just increased the quality of life of everyone involved. This military intervention didn't disadvantage one group over another. This military intervention didn't usurp international laws and norms. This military intervention had nothing to do, and this is one of the things we constantly hear: NATO is a defensive alliance. In which of these instances was NATO actually defending a NATO country? None of the countries that NATO has taken interventions in since its inception have actually been NATO countries. When you look at this list, which one of these countries are NATO? So if you're talking about a rules-based order, what right does a third party have to intervene in a war, intervene in a conflict, take military action, and pick a side and make sure that that side is the winning side? That's the rules-based order they're talking about. When we decide what we want to do, it becomes the law. Right now you hear about seizing Russia's $300 billion in reserves. Is that part of the rules-based order? Was the intervention in Libya part of the rules-based order? Is having United States having bases in Syria part of a rules-based order? Is the United States putting bases in places where the countries did not ask for those bases a part of the rules-based order? Is lifting or levying embargoes, levying sanctions, levying export bans based solely on political, geopolitical motives, part of the rules-based order, and creating a fair economics? This author is living, and I like to think it's gaslighting. That's essentially what it is. It's just a form of gaslighting. If you're not informed enough, if you're not educated enough, if you don't know enough about history, you will hear these things and boom, you'll accept them as the truth. They rarely teach now history in the schools the way they used to. They don't teach world history. They don't teach about the wars and the interventions in school. So when you hear these things from the media, a lot of people accept them as just the truth. They don't know because their historical foundation they don't remember, they haven't lived long enough, and they haven't studied enough history to know that this is nothing more than gaslighting and trying to get you to adopt a point of view based not on the providing of information, but on your ignorance, depending on your ignorance and your unwillingness to go and to research and to find out the truth. NATO underplayed civilian deaths in Libya. NATO bombed trying to remove the leader of a country. NATO was in no part being attacked by any member of Libya. It had nothing to do. This was a political action to give France control. They thought over this region to give the West control. Gaddafi was not going to allow the West to take control over his country, and whenever they saw an opportunity, they were going to use military force. Is that rules-based? Is that a peaceful world? What right do they have to decide who will rule Libya? And I would argue Libya is a total basket case of a country. It is a failed state now. Lives for many of the people in Libya are worse now than they were before. I mean, it is disastrous what has come of society, the hanging of Africans and the lynchings and the murdering of civilians and the destabilizing of the country, breaking it into fragmentation, armed groups. It is a basket case of a country. And after NATO did their intervention, and how can you say this is a rules-based order designed to create peace? Don't forget about Kosovo. Oh my goodness, the bombing in Kosovo, all of the civilians that got caught up, the infrastructure. They're talking about what's going on with Russia attacking power plants. And I thought to myself, isn't that what NATO did? Isn't that what they did in Serbia, Kosovo? Isn't that what they did during that conflict? Bombing the infrastructure of a country in order to make it submit to their desires and their will. So now when one country does it, and this is the whole problem, it's when one country does something, where the West does it, it's automatically justified by the mainstream media, is automatically considered to be legal and in line with the rules and global. But when another country does it, they cry foul. When a country that's aligned with the US bombs hospitals, it's okay. When another country bombs hospitals, it is a crime. When a country aligns with the United States, bombs consulates and embassies, sends missiles into third countries, not because that country has attacked them, but because they find political power and they find military power by attacking a target in another country. It's okay. Long as you're aligned with the U.S., you're aligned with NATO, you're aligned, you can fire missiles into another country. You can bomb out consulates and embassies. You can hit humanitarian targets. You can pretty much do whatever you want, and it is inside the rules-based order. Let a country that is outside of that alliance do the same thing, and it is automatically a justification for military action by NATO. It is outside of the rules-based order. It's horrible. It's the worst thing that's ever happened in the world. This is the world which people who are watching events are seeing and observing. They're listening to the White House press secretary answer questions. They're listening to the British government answer questions. They're watching parliamentary debates in Britain and throughout the Western world, and they're seeing the hypocrisy on display day by day. They're seeing the inherent corruption of the international system, and they're saying to themselves, hey, if I don't take action, if I don't align myself with some partners, this is what the other countries, wouldn't you, if you were in their shoes, wouldn't you do the same thing? Begin to find yourself some allies to line up with so that you don't become exposed to a unipolar world where you are at the mercy of those who do not share your same political, economic, security concerns. They have their own set, and their set of concerns, this Davos crowd, only includes them. Listen to this. How China, Russia, and Iran are forging closer ties. I wanted to set the stage for these three, and I want to jump down to the second paragraph of this article. For much of history, Russia, Iran, and China were less chummy. Imperialist at heart, they often meddled in one another's neighborhoods and jostled for control of Asia's trade routes. Lately, however, America has changed the dynamic. In 2020, 2 years after exiting a deal limiting Iran's nuclear program, it reimposed a trade embargo on the country. More penalties were announced in January to punish Iran for backing Hamas and Houthi rebels. Russia fell under Western sanctions in 2022 after invading Ukraine, which were recently tightened. Well, meanwhile, China faces restrictions of its own, which could become much more stringent if Donald Trump is elected president in November. Essentially, this bipolar world has been created by the United States. It is in response to, it is a necessity to protect their interest from a capricious and a punitive application of the rules-based order, the breaking of the norms and the rules established by the West to create a level playing field are constantly broken and flaunted. They are constantly skirted when it's in the interest of the West and their allies. And thus it has become necessary, and that in and of itself has created disorder. You have disorder when there's one referee and that referee can be bought off. When there's one referee and that referee says, if you're with me, you do whatever you want. When there's one referee in the world and they have a particular geopolitical worldview that they will apply to the application of lenses, of rules, and through the lens of their own self-interest, then you have disorder and anarchy. So to create two referees is not the creation of disorder. Disorder is what we currently have. Having two referees creates stability and order. So the access that they're talking about, this China, Russia, Iran, this emergence of BRICS and other global South partnerships and alliances, is an attempt to make sure that the rules-based order that has been established, the rules are applied equally to all countries in all situations. And thus, it is not a move to disorder, it is a movement to order. But I thought about it a little further. Those who want power above morality, those who want power above fairness, those who want power above all else, the movement away from their power to them is always considered to be disorder. Whenever you move away from the power that one group has, they will always complain and say anarchy is coming. And that's essentially what the West is doing. They're crying foul because a new alliance is coming into being, and they're going to have to deal differently in their international relations. And as a such, they consider it as disorder. It is deconstructing, it is disrupting, but it is not a movement to disorder. Let me give you 3 reasons. First, that this Russia, Iran, China access, this iron triangle will have great influence on the world and be a counterweight to NATO. I'm not saying that it's going to defeat NATO. I'm not saying that the two will have head-to-head conflict. What I am saying is, if you're not in NATO, you're going to want to be in some alliance. And that alliance will be, the foundation of it will be Russia, China, and Iran. And the basis of that alliance, the strength of that alliance, has to do partially with what economics they bring to bear. And it doesn't have to have parity with the West. It doesn't have to have equality. It just has to have strength enough to create a deterrent. That if you try to lock us out of the global system, we've got a deterrent. If you try to put embargoes, if you try to do sanctions against us, we have an alternative means of pressing forward. Iran and Russia have recently signed 19 contracts to strengthen their bilateral cooperation across various industries, as reported by the Shanghai news agency affiliated with the Iranian oil ministry. These agreements reached during the 17th meeting of the Joint Economic Cooperation Committee in Tehran encompass energy, health, trade, and education sectors. So you're forcing these individuals together. They're not coming together out of their own desire to be allies. There was much tension between these groups. And that's one of the historical facts that the media consistently leaves out. The media consistently leaves out the fact that these groups were not enemies, but had competition. That there was always a grumbling. Even now, you look at this situation between China and India. There's always these disputes, these cross-border disputes about this region or that region. There's always this jockeying for control and for power. But as the West becomes more punitive and becomes more imperialistic, it pushes these groups who have at times competing interests. It forces them to bury the hatchet and try to come together, bury the axe and try to come together as a unified bloc to protect their interest. Russia's war economy expands more than forecast despite sanctions. One of the powers, the economic powers that this bloc will have is the Russian war machine. The Russian war machine, the Soviet war machine, was a powerful bloc. Arms trades and arms deals will increase after this Russia-Ukraine war is ended. I am under the impression, and this is just mine, I want you to write it down in your calendar, what I say on this day. And you come and leave a comment in the comments later on if it's proven to be true, or if not, I want you to call me on it. But I'm going to make a prediction right here, right now. When this war between Ukraine, or really between Russia and NATO, is over, The world will be flush with military weapons and capabilities that they never have had access to before. Russia will be exporting air defense systems, other systems. They will be doing everything they can to provide military support to the global south in order. So while we say that the Russian war economy is only temporary, I think the Russian military industrial complex will grow exponentially. Their production capacity will not diminish after the war. It is quite possible that that production capacity could continue and expand as they begin to ramp up arms sales to allies. And I think they will not only make those arms sales to allies, I think they will make those arms sales to allies and individuals and groups, well, countries in the global south who are aligned with them, even in instances where they are providing those things at cost, because at cost is still better than at a loss, and at cost enables them to keep their defense industry humming along even without significant profits, but it's giving them another advantage, and that other advantage is you're building up military capacity within your economic bloc without you yourself having to spend the rubles to make it happen. And I think they're going to be offering arms like you've never seen before. I think Iran will be offering arms like you've never seen before. The Syrian military, the Iranian military, we're going to see a global arms race, unlike anything that we've seen before. The production capacity that Russia is employing as a result of this war will not be reduced after the war. This is my prediction. It will be shifted from sustaining the war to supplying and building up military arms throughout Africa. These African countries that have tried to work with the West, work with their former colonial masters, they no longer will allow them to be the source of their arms. You see through the Sahel region, Russia is rising. You see throughout Africa, China is rising. These countries, when they are able to secure themselves from Western intervention, can have stable governments, can have economic prosperity, and I think they will be looking to the bear to provide them with what they need. They will be looking to Africa Corps to provide them the type of security and stability and military infrastructure they need to create the types of environments where they can have economic prosperity. And it's not out of a hatred for the West, it's out of a necessity because how the West has operated throughout the world. Economically, you'll also see that China, Janet Yellen is going to China to tell China to stop its industrial production. I never heard of a more cockamamie idea in my life. You're going to go to a foreign country and tell them that they are overproducing. No, you're underproducing. Or if you're not underproducing, you're producing products that nobody wants. Look how many F-150s are sitting on the lot. You created these EV trucks. They cost a small fortune. They cost more than a house in portions of, you could buy a house for what they're selling these Ford Lightnings for. And they're complaining that there's not a market for people to buy cars that are more expensive than their house across the country when inflation is rising, when, we hear about how good the economy is going, but let's look at the economy from the standpoint of the average person. Inflation is rising, education expenses are rising, food expenses are soaring. We've got layoffs and jobs. So while the stock market is doing good, and that's how some people measure the economy, my portfolio is up. The Davos crowd is only concerned with their portfolio, but most people are not concerned with their portfolio. They're concerned with putting food on the table. They're concerned with trying to get their kids in school. They're concerned with transportation costs. They're concerned with their high credit card. They're concerned with their mortgage and their interest rates. That's what's moving most people. They're not the portfolio portion. How many people in the West actually own stock? The majority of people do not own a portion of the stock market. And so to tell the world that, oh, the economy is doing, it's not doing great. The real problem is not China's industrialization. It's China 2025. The real problem is that the West chose to squander its resources on politics and picking and choosing who they wanted to make rich. The bribery and corruption associated with the legislative process, all of the overpricing, the waste, the fraud, the abuse that takes place in the industrial and the political processes associated with the West led to the creation of inefficient, high cost. And when I say inefficient, the systems for constructing these things, I mean, are inefficient. When you have to put a product out there that's $110, $120, $130, $140,000 vehicle, there's only a certain sector of the population that can buy that. And so Yellen going to China telling them, hey, you need to stop your industrial production because you're cheating. Well, no, they're not, maybe not cheating. They're doing the same thing the West is doing it. They're just doing it better. And the other reality is, hey, you got to make better EVs. If you want to EVs to boom, you're going to have to build the infrastructure for EVs. I don't want to have to be searching for a place to charge my vehicle. I don't want to have to sit for 4 hours to get my vehicle charged when I'm trying to drive cross country. There's some real challenges that have to be adopted in order to compete. And instead of competing, they want to do trade embargoes. They want to do more sanctions. They want to rope other Western countries into trying to isolate China. But all they're doing is forcing China into a alliance with the global South, an alliance with those who will operate differently. But even with that, it's not working. Look at it. World's biggest manufacturing economies, even with all of what's going on. You talk about an economic alliance with power. Look what China is producing. China is rocking and rolling in their production of a manufacturing sector. How Chinese car companies built so wide a lead in the race to make EVs. Look at this: the race for EVs, the race to put new cars and new products on to the market. China is a generation. You can see some articles that say China is a generation ahead with this. You're putting this economic capacity inside of a bloc. You're driving them towards a military and economic bloc. And they're going to bring that capacity. We talk about how Russia is able to sustain itself. Everyone said they would collapse during the Russia-Ukraine war, but China is providing them with dual purpose products. They're getting products from other countries that are assisting them. And when you drive these countries together, you're going to have to face the fact that this alliance is one with capacity. This alliance is an alliance with the capabilities to not it's not about challenging and getting conflict. It's about ensuring that you treat fairly all of the countries in the global South. And that's what you're going to have. Let's look at this. We talk about economics. BRICS nations say new currency may offer shield from sanctions. They have driven the global South together to do something that the global South really initially had no interest in doing. They were fine with the dollar, long as it was going to be used in a way that was fair, as long as individuals would have access. But the moment you start sanctioning countries because of their religious beliefs, sanctioning countries because of their political or their geopolitical affiliations, or sanctioning them because they have security concerns, doing embargoes against countries just because you are afraid to compete with those countries, then there's a problem with this so-called rules-based order. And it has forced BRICS, it has forced the alliances and the global South to come up with ways to insulate themselves from all of these types of actions. New BRICS member Iran, Iran in January joined BRICS. They had their first round of expansion. Calls for digital currency systems this year, 2024. The new currency system, the system that will rival SWIFT. And BRICS has said they're going to make a powerful announcement this year. I can't wait to hear and see what it is. And when I do, I'm going to definitely make a live stream on it. New BRICS member Iran calls for digital currency systems this year. BRICS prepares to launch currency in 2024. This year, this is the plan that's going out this year, and it is to separate themselves or to provide a balance from this notion of sanctions and cutting off. You know, when you take the money, the $300 billion that Russia has in reserves in the West, and you create a rationale for seizing those funds, what do you think the rest of the world is going to do? What do you honestly think that the rest of the world will do once they see that taking place? They're going to say, wait a minute. We've got to do something about this currency. We can't continue to hold the US dollar as our reserves. We're going to have to move and we're going to have to diversify. I'm not saying they're going to get rid of the dollar. I'm not saying that that's going to be removed. But what I am saying is there definitely will be a diversification. There definitely will be a move towards trying to insulate oneself from this happening. Should we fall out of favor with the West, they could just take anyone's funds, regardless of what the purpose is, regardless. It is not a rules-based order. Whenever you decide to do something, you do it without any thought about how it will impact the system as a whole. That's the problem that you have with the Western leadership that we currently have. Let's look at this diplomatic. The alliance that Russia, China, and Iran are the iron triangle or the foundation of is growing. It is growing in strength, it is growing economically, and it is growing in membership. 30 new countries prepare to join alliance in 2024. There are applications to join the economic bloc of BRICS that from all across the world. Countries are clamoring to join BRICS group. South Africa says as Russia takes up leadership, there has been a move. Look at all of the countries that in the last round applied but did not receive admission. You think those countries are going away? No, they're going to apply again. They're going to keep pushing so that they can be a part of this bloc. And as the global South rises, you're now seeing the creation of a bipolar world, a creation of a world where not one side or the other will be able to unilaterally flaunt the global system, the global rules, the global norms without the expectation that there could be major confrontation. And it will create new boundaries. I don't think it's a move to disorder. That's what this is about. It's not a move to disorder. It's a move to order. But it's from the perspective of those who have wielded power without a concern for fairness. It is considered to be disorder for them, but what they consider to be order is a system that they dominate. Look at this. Leaders of 23 nations officially expressed desire to join BRICS. Some of these nations joined BRICS, like Iran. The rest of them are going to continue to seek to join BRICS. They're going to continue to seek alliance, where alliances can be made and their political, geopolitical, their defense, their economic system. Yes, BRICS is not there's this connection. You know, this channel is mainly an economics channel, but there is a connection between geopolitics and economics. And if you can create economic alliances that insulate you from punitive measures by the West, you've also done something militarily. One of the problems with sanctions is the purpose of sanctions is to create destabilizing conditions amongst the civilian population. Sanctions' primary focus is harming the lives of regular, everyday people, people who have nothing to do with geopolitics, people who don't have anything to do with global governments. They're just trying to live their lives. Sanctions is designed to make them angry so that they can rise up against the government. Sanctions is also designed to hurt a country's economic as well as military defense capacity. By driving down the economy, it's trying to hurt or limit the government's ability to create defense for its citizens, to fund its military, to create industrial capacity. That's essentially what sanctions are designed as. So by joining the economic bloc of BRICS, you free yourself from the military actions. You know, they talk about sanctions as a tool of war, as an instrument of war, an instrument of power. And indeed it is. It is an instrument to harm a country at its core, to weaken it, not just economically, but to weaken it militarily. And if you can free yourself from that, then you can sustain a defense complex, sustain a defense industry that enables your country to defend itself, even when the West doesn't, you fall out of favor with the Western country. And so this is the issue that's coming up. Let's talk about defense. Let's jump on over to defense. Defense and security. China, Russia, Iran, maritime drills send signal to West. What is the signal that it's sending to the West? It's sending a signal that we will come together, not just on the economic front, but we will combine our industrial capacity, our military industrial capacity, and we will use that capacity, that combined capacity, to create a firewall against the capricious actions of Western partners. And in particular, the United States is the one that is driving this alliance. They're creating, and I think to myself, maybe this is intentional. In order to sell and buy arms, you have to always have a boogeyman. In order for the American defense industry to thrive, there has to be war. There has to be a boogeyman. And maybe the input of these defense contractors is always pushing America to adventurism, pushing the political leaders to expanding and to going into places and engaging in interventions to destabilize the world, so that military intervention will become necessary, so that they have a market for their goods. And I don't wonder this. I believe that is part of what drives American foreign policy, is the need for some to generate revenue. I heard the administration say giving arms to Ukraine is a work program. It's a economic investment program. Is that really what war is about? Is war really about helping fatten the pockets of a few people? Not to mention the people who are dying in Ukraine as a result of this war. You're selling aid packages as a way to boost the economy of the United States. I thought to myself, that was one of the most heinous, immoral. I don't understand how anyone who heard it, I don't understand how you could sit around in a meeting and say, hey, we need to sell aid to Ukraine, not on the basis of its nobility, but we need to sell it because killing across the world will bring jobs to some people in the Midwest, bring jobs to some people in the South or other portions of the country. Is that really what we're doing with our military resources? Or are we investing for defense? Are we sending aid because we believe in the cause? Or are we just doing this as an economic stimulus package? I thought that was heinous. And the fact that they said in a meeting and came out with it means that there was no one in the meeting who stood up and said, hey, this is deplorable. This is an immoral way to present what we are doing. And if that is our true motives, we need to stop this immediately. No one said that in the meeting. And so they went out all around the world and they got hammered in the media from many sectors, but not the mainstream media. The mainstream media ran with it. They said, this is great. They ate it up like Thanksgiving dinner. Look, Russia, China, and Iran finished drills in the Gulf of Oman. They are showing that they are training together and that they will grow together as an alliance and as a counterweight. But I put this article in here to show you a very different situation between the defense that Russia, China, and Iran are undergoing, their defense cooperation and coalition, and the one that the West has been engaged in. I want you to look at this. This is a map of the bases that the United States has across the world. These are all of the military bases. When you compare this map to the China, Russia, Iran, to the global South map, what you realize is it's not the Iron Triangle. It's not China trying to push into the United States area of operation and security. It's the United States trying to surround these nations and to force these nations to capitulate to their capricious application of world orders through military force. And they're standing up and saying, no, we're not going to bow down. Look, what purpose would the United States have for military bases all over the world unless their true agenda, their true goal is for global domination and a one world, a unipolar world? And that's essentially what they're saying, is that if you don't do what we say when we say, if you're with us, you can do whatever you want. If you're not with us, we're going to try to impose rules on you that we don't follow ourselves, and that our allies don't have to follow. We're going to impose those on you, as well as we're going to threaten. We talk about the Russia Ukraine war and the movement of NATO. But it's not just the movement of NATO, it's the movement of the United States and the bases and the military installations that they have surrounded many of the countries of the global south. They are surrounding these countries with military bases. And you wonder why they're coming together in defense pacts. You wonder why they're saying, hey, enough is enough. We're not sending bases to Mexico. You're sending bases to Taiwan and funding and funneling arms into Taiwan. You're funneling arms into Ukraine. You're funneling arms into Saudi Arabia and other places as a way to weaken our defense, our national defense, our ability to defend our citizens. And you want us to sit back and do nothing. And the countries of the world are not going to sit back and do nothing. Iran and Russia enter a new level of military cooperation. This military cooperation was a military cooperation of necessity. It wasn't because they wanted to. It was because of the failed policies of the West, in particular the United States, is creating, the enemies. My enemy's enemy is my friend. And so essentially that's what you're getting. The United States is making so many enemies across the world. Those enemies are now starting to coalesce and see themselves see their alliance is the only counterweight to an existential threat, rather than keeping the rules. We talk about often when we talk about global reserve currencies, there's this thing called the exorbitant privilege, the enormous privilege that the world extended to the United States to use the dollar after World War II. There was a privilege that the world extended to the United States after the fall of the Soviet Union to create a rules-based order. But the exploitation of that privilege, the abuse of that privilege, it wasn't that individuals just resisted the West or resisted the United States inherently. It was the application of military power, the use of the privilege of the economic system, the reserve currency, the SWIFT, the privileges that the world extended to the U.S. to lead those institutions, to lead the world in that way, was consistently flaunted, was consistently exploited. Countries were consistently taken advantage of. And so that privilege that was extended is now being retracted. And there are enough individuals who feel at threat that they are going to create their own coalition. Militarily, Iran has military capacity. A lot of times we think about Iran's military capacity, but while Iran may not have the manufacturing and the industrial capacity that China and Russia have, they do have technologies. And we saw this when during the war, there was a need for drones. And who did Russia turn to? Russia turned to Iran. And those drones proved to be pivotal in saving the war effort. And I won't say saving the war effort, because I don't believe that it was ever under real threat. There would be bad times. Those times would have been extended. But ultimately, Russia will defeat Ukraine just because, and this is a math issue, the size of the population, the size of the economies, the capacity to produce and reproduce, as well as whenever you put a large country in direct conflict with a smaller country, capacity-wise, and you create an existential threat to that large country, in this case it being Russia, they will pull every lever they can to win. So losing is not an option, because the loss for them is the end of their existence. And so when they see it as an existential threat, there's no, you may win this month or maybe winning next month, but they will regroup and continue to press forward. And over time, both sides in any military conflict learn. They learn from each other, they learn from their losses, and if they have the economic and the military and industrial capacity, they take those lessons and they put them to work to create more. So even if the first army had been totally, or the first deployment had been totally destroyed, a new deployment would have come with new tactics and new equipment. And even if that deployment had been destroyed, it would have kept coming until they got it right. And they will not allow themselves to lose this conflict. They are all in. And that's the problem that Ukraine doesn't never really fully grasp, that Russia was all in on saving Russia. They saw this as an existential threat. And once they decided to be all in, the question Ukraine should have asked is NATO all in at whatever cost, as long as it will take? And I don't know that the answer to that question is yes. Putin calls for closer Russia-China cooperation on military satellites and prospective weapons. Once again, if you're going to put bases all around China, China is going to begin to look for allies in case it has to defend itself. It's not going to sit idle and watch a superpower build bases on its doorsteps, build naval facilities trying to cut off and choke off its trade should China do anything they find or deem to be undesirable. No country is going to sit around and leave itself totally and completely without the capacity to defend itself against its adversaries, against its potential adversaries. And the expansion of these bases, the expansion of military capacity, as well as the use of that capacity in third-party conflicts, the use of NATO intervening in conflicts that NATO is not a part of, means that NATO is an offensive alliance. And who wants any offensive alliance to be on their doorstep? So any partner of an offensive alliance, Russia, China, and others will continue to come together. They will continue to make trade pacts. They will continue to strengthen themselves, not just economically through BRICS, not just through bilateral trade, but they will continue to do it militarily. And I would argue that the biggest threat is not only Russia's industrial capacity being cranked up and used to arm the global South. The biggest issue is Russia sharing the knowledge it has gained in Ukraine. There has not been a near-peer conflict. And by near peer, what I mean is there's not been a conflict where both sides had the same technology at the highest levels of the defense industry. Both sides had credible armies that were well trained. Both sides had defensive and offensive capabilities, aerospace capabilities, had aeronautics, air forces. There's not been a near-peer conflict. Most of the time, NATO is bombing inferior militaries or bombing countries that are not sophisticated in their air defenses and are not sophisticated in their military hardware. This war between Russia and NATO has been the first conflict in modern times between near-peer adversaries. And as a result of that, there is a lot of learning and training that can come out of it. Russia has learned a lot. And it's from that knowledge, when shared with China, when shared with Iran, that is going to allow them to change their tactics, their strategies, their squad tactics at all levels. I anticipate that the global South will be reorganizing. Not only they're watching, everybody in the world is watching what's going on in Russia, and they're evaluating how the war is going, what weapons work, what weapons don't work, what scenarios, how the soldiers are performing, and in what scenarios. And all of the world is going to be reevaluating, restructuring, And I think Ukraine will be sharing their lessons learned with the West, as well as Russia will be sharing its lessons learned with not just China and Iran, but with the entire global South. I anticipate those lessons learned on defense that Russia has gained will be throughout Africa and throughout the world. The difference is, while the West would have shared its lessons learned among its NATO and its EU allies, Russia and China and Iran will be sharing that information on how to structure, how to respond, how to organize, how to do mass movements. They will be sharing that and building up a global South that they will be arming in a new way. This world will not necessarily go into anarchy, but there will be a counterweight, a significant counterweight to what's been done in this so-called rules-based order. Iran will play a part of it in its missiles, its drones, in its technology, in its capacity. And I think that while you see Israel and others poking at Iran constantly targeting Iran, what you will see over time is Iran being strategic in how they respond, Iran avoiding, just like China, avoiding direct conflict. But in the meantime, they're going to be doing a buildup of their army, their military as a whole, their naval, all their forces. They're going to be building up, and they will respond, I think, at a time once they believe that their strength is at parity. Not just their strength, but the strength of their alliance is at parity with the West. And that may take some time, but that's, I think, what has constrained. We hear, will Iran respond to this attack or that attack? I don't think that responding is in their best interest. Overtly responding and giving a justification, a rationale publicly for invasion by the Western offensive alliance, I think they're going to wait. They're going to buy their time. They're going to wait till this Russia-Ukraine war is over. They're going to wait and rearm, get new technologies from their partners. And when they do come out, they will be ready to rock and roll. This new world, bipolar world, I'm not going to call it disorder, this new world, bipolar world, it's not a new world order. It's the reasserting of a bipolar world. It used to be U.S. and Soviet Union. But now it's going to be a bipolar world where NATO is on one side and the global South is on the other. And I don't think that it will be destabilizing. I think that it will create a balance to where both sides will have to adhere to some norms in the economic system, some norms in the military system, because the threat of conflict, that's one of the things that held the world together during the Cold War. The threat of conflict was so great, and what it would do to the human race was so great and so damaging. Just the thought of nuclear war, the thought of mass armies, the thought of movements of a war where two superpowers collide, the damage that would be left in the wake of such a collision is going to be so great that it will cause the world to be stabilized. It will cause the world to have a system at which neither side wants to engage in such a calamity. And as such, the rules then can be enforced by both sides. The rules can then be followed. The adventurism that we see now from the West, the one-side exploitation of the rules that we see, that world will no longer exist. Iran is on its way to replace